In 1947, Queen Elizabeth II married Prince Philip. 60 years on, their marriage is the longest of any royal. To mark this very special wedding anniversary, ITV now looks back with interviews and memories from some of their nearest and dearest.
It was the fairy tale romance that captivated a kingdom.
They were the darling couple of the empire, and there's no other way of putting it.
A glamour-starved populace were enthralled by the wedding of the century. The beautiful young princess and her dashing young prince.
She blossomed into a very beautiful young woman with that dazzling complexion. And he really looked like a kind of Viking god. Marvellous looking. All the girls in England were in love with him.
It's a love story that has survived the test of time.
On the morning of the wedding, Prince Philip said, "Am I being very brave or incredibly foolish?"
On Tuesday, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh celebrate their diamond wedding anniversary. 60 years ago, on the 20th of November 1947, they stepped through these doors of the West Portico of Westminster Abbey to begin their married life together. In the years that have passed since that momentous day, everything around them has changed. The union they forged has survived for better, for worse, and the very worst. They've stayed together for 60 years, making theirs the longest marriage of any reigning monarch, and a symbol of commitment and continuity for the whole country.
The great thing about the Queen's relationship with the Duke of Edinburgh is that it is a partnership, and it's a partnership not only for us as a family, but it's also a partnership in terms of the country.
It's such a challenge for any working family, isn't it? Juggling home life and work life. And of course, in the case of the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh, they had an extremely busy national duty, and yet they did seem to manage to juggle that very successfully.
Well, everything's a juggle, and it doesn't make any difference in the sense of, even my experience of having two children. You do have to juggle your responsibilities with your family life.
The love story begins at Dartmouth Royal Naval College, where the young Princess Elizabeth accompanied her father, King George VI, on an official visit in 1939. There she first became entranced by the handsome naval cadet, Prince Philip of Greece.
Prince Philip was detailed to look after the young princesses, but it was an 18-year-old looking after two little girls. They played, I think, with a railway set. They played croquet afterwards, but I think at that stage it was certainly her looking at him, not him looking at her.
He showed off madly, you know, and when they sailed away, he had his little boat going round and round, long after he was supposed to sail back to Dartmouth College.
It will be recalled that Princess Elizabeth celebrated...
Immediately after this life-changing encounter, World War II began, and Princess Elizabeth embarked on her first royal duties.
Review contingents of 8 battalions of the Grenadier Guards, of which he is colonel.
Prince Philip served with distinction in the Royal Navy.
Prince Philip had a fantastic war. He was a genuine war hero. He came back not only with decorations, but also with the same kind of self-confidence that you have when you know that you've done something really well.
Prince Philip and Princess Elizabeth had grown closer during his wartime leave, but it wasn't until Lady Patricia Mountbatten's wedding in 1946 that the wider public realised something was afoot. He was an usher, she was a bridesmaid.
He is taking the coat from Princess Elizabeth, and they were sort of looking at each other. And I think this was the first time that anybody outside the family, or certainly the press, thought, oh, what may be happening here?
As rumours of a royal romance spread, King George took the whole family on tour to South Africa to insulate Princess Elizabeth from the fevered speculation back home.
I think the delay was imposed for two reasons. the part of George VI, because he wanted his daughter to reflect on it, grow up a little bit more, and on the part of Queen Elizabeth, because I think she had reservations about Prince Philip.
Let me begin by saying thank you.
The princess turned 21 while she was in South Africa. To mark the occasion, she made one of her most significant broadcasts, dedicating herself to the service of the entire Commonwealth and setting the tone for the whole of her future life.
I declare before you all that my whole life, whether it be long or short, shall be devoted to your service.
When she came back, it was finally felt that the formal announcement of her engagement to Prince Philip could be made.
I think she fell in love with Prince Philip when he went down to Dartmouth, and when she blossomed into a very beautiful young woman with that dazzling complexion. And so he fell too. He, of course, really looked like a kind of Viking god, you know, very tall, very blonde, marvellous looking. All the girls in England were in love with him.
There were some people who were concerned that Prince Philip wasn't bringing very much money into the royal family. He wasn't going to have a bean to contribute. But it didn't matter to the three people who mattered: Princess Elizabeth, of course, and her parents.
And so the stage was set for the wedding of a lifetime. The enchanting young heiress to the throne of England and her own Prince Charming. The wedding, set for the 20th of November 1947, was to be a blessed relief from the austerity of the post-war period.
We were just out of the war, rationing was still around, and I think that people took a very forward decision at the time, which was that this was something that needed to be celebrated. We needed something to raise the morale.
The royal wedding was just the event a war-weary nation craved. The wedding dress was made of ivory silk satin, specially spun in Braintree in Essex, and designed by Norman Hartnell, who had a workshop in London's Mayfair.
So this was the sketch that Princess Elizabeth chose for her wedding dress?
Yes. I remember seeing the sketch when he brought it to the table, and beautiful. His sketch is absolutely beautiful.
It was stunning, wasn't it?
I did finish the sleeves. I also made the buttons for the sleeves.
What other bits did you work on?
I worked all the buttonholes down the back of the dress.
And I bet there were a lot of those.
I think there were 20 or 22, and I've got a sample of the buttonholes. There we are, I had to practice.
Those stitches, Betty, are minute.
And I had never worked a buttonhole. I'd never done a buttonhole before.
So how much did you have to practice then?
Quite a lot. Bit of embroidery, that's marvellous.
The dress was covered with tiny pearls arranged as white roses of York, entwined with ears of corn embroidered in crystal.
Norman Hartnell did his stuff, and he came back from a visit to the Far East, and when he was asked what he had to declare by customs, he said 10,000 pearls for Princess Elizabeth.
The day is November the 20th, 1947. The time, 11 o'clock. A nation and a world watch. Once only in
As the crowds gathered and the bridesmaids were beginning to get nervous, the bride herself was a model of composure.
She was very reassuring to us all and put us at our sort of ease. And, I mean, it must have been very nerve-wracking for her, but she never showed any sign of it. And she's very good at that.
The run-up to the wedding was not without its fraught moments. At the last minute, some flowers went missing. They were being kept cool in a room somewhere. Queen Mary's tiara, it snapped just as it was being put on. And worst of all, the double string of pearls, the gift from the King and Queen to Princess Elizabeth, was missing.
Here was this beautiful young princess and very handsome young prince. And it was a sort of fairy story come true.
It was a wonderful event. We hadn't had anything like it for years. For a generation, we hadn't been able to put out flags, dress up, and have a party. And that's what the royal wedding gave people.
Weddings are supposed to be a party. Weddings are a joyous occasion for everybody to get together and to have a wonderful time. And I'm sure that from my experience of my wedding and the wedding of my elder brother, they would have had just as much fun at the Queen's wedding as they did in my experience.
There were 8 of us as bridesmaids. I was just 18, and it was lovely. It was all a wow.
The bridesmaids also wore Hartnell gowns with floral headdresses to match the princess's bouquet.
So that's actually what you wore on the day?
Absolutely.
You must have felt very special with that. Although I don't know, looking at it now, it looks a little tired, doesn't it?
Very tired, poor thing. But these have survived, and I think they're made of wax.
Now, of course, after the wedding, at the wedding breakfast, you were given a wonderful gift by the Duke of Edinburgh, weren't you? Which I think you still have.
Yes, I have. I've got it here. I'll show it to you.
Tell me about this.
Well, it's a powder compact, I think it's called. And I never use it normally now because it's rather precious, but it opens up.
Yes.
And it's got a soft powder, which nobody uses now much, and a powder puff.
And how was that presented to you?
Well, Prince Philip just sort of doled them out like that to all of us, in a rather sort of notional way, as you can imagine. And I think this was, personally, I think I was very lucky. I think it's one of the prettiest.
Now, there's a lovely picture where the bridesmaids are rushing after the carriage after the service. Do you remember that?
Yes, I do remember running after the carriage. I think as it was leaving, we all ran. And I can't remember if we were throwing confetti or what, but we sort of chased after it until it went out of the gates of Buckingham Palace.
Their Majesties and Princess Margaret joined in saying bon voyage to the bridal couple, pelting them with rose petals as their carriage moved away. A leave-taking in which their Majesties' good wishes were united with those of their people.
The honeymoon began at Lord Mountbatten's home, Broadlands in Hampshire, where the Duke of Edinburgh rapidly had to come to terms with how much his life had been transformed. They were by no means alone. There were the inevitable corgis, of course, but also a film crew and a whole retinue of staff.
One of the most disconcerting things was to find that your young bride was somebody who had a maid in constant attendance, who was, as it were, drawing the bath for her charge and expecting to sit in the bathroom with the young princess and slightly wondering what Prince Philip was doing there.
The stay at Broadlands was followed by a second leg of the honeymoon at Balmoral. But the couple's longer-term housing arrangements were in disarray. They had planned to move to Sunninghill Park in Berkshire.
Things didn't go quite according to plan because, of course, they didn't have a home, did they? Their house had burnt down.
That's a common problem for members of the royal family, not having a home. It takes a bit of time to sort oneself out a home. Their home, as we know, burnt down before they were due to move in it, a very short period before.
So it was here at Buckingham Palace, rather than at Sunninghill Park, that they began their married life. Home for the Princess Elizabeth, at the in-laws for the Duke of Edinburgh. Of course, for Princess Elizabeth, her whole life so far had been lived in the public spotlight, and her wedding had been no different. But all too soon, the tragically early death of her beloved father, the King, would thrust her into the role that would transform her own and her husband's life forever, that of Queen.
When will Britain be switching to digital TV? To find out this and more, go to itv.com/switchover.
In 1949, Princess Elizabeth and the Duke of Edinburgh left Buckingham Palace. But only 3 years later, they would be forced to return in the most heartbreaking of circumstances.
The Duke had been posted to Malta as First Lieutenant on HMS Chequers in the Mediterranean Fleet.
There is no doubt that the first 4 or 5 years of their married life was relatively normal. They were a young, married naval couple. Outside of the public gaze, he was doing his job, she was being supportive.
In the same dance with the princess is her cousin, Lady Pamela Mountbatten.
They loved doing reels, Scottish reels, so the 8th and the 16th, which are very wild dances. You get flung around.
This happy and relatively normal period in their lives, when they had their first 2 children, came to an abrupt end in 1952. Her beloved father, King George, died while the royal couple were in Kenya. She had been accompanied there by her lady-in-waiting.
I went up to her and gave her a kiss and a hug because she adored her father, and I thought how awful for her. And then, of course, I thought, my God, she's the Queen.
The young couple returned by plane to face the momentous change to their lives.
There's this 25-year-old woman with her husband in the Navy, extremely successful, obviously would go to the top in his profession, 2 small children. And this has all come to an end. Their private life is finished.
I think it was very difficult for Prince Philip. As long as the king was alive, he was able to continue his career. But of course, the king dying so early did completely change not only her life, but of course it changed his life as well.
From the funeral of a king to the anointing of a queen. Queen Elizabeth II's coronation in June 1953 was the first to be televised. The unprecedented public interest guaranteed that, from now on, the royal marriage would more than ever be lived very largely in the public eye.
It was a day like no other. I mean, it was so awe-inspiring, really. No Hollywood director could ever think up something as magnificent as that. And she looked so vulnerable and so delicate.
As part of the solemn ritual, the Duke of Edinburgh paid homage to the Queen by pledging himself to be her liege man of life and limb. It was the first taste of his future life, standing perpetually just to one side of the Queen.
What he was doing there was pledging complete loyalty to his wife. He stuck to that, and it's an important part of their relationship.
From her broadcast as a princess to her coronation oath, the Queen had promised to carry out her role faithfully, and now she threw herself wholeheartedly into her royal duties, with the Duke of Edinburgh loyally at her side.
Very few men of Prince Philip's generation have spent their lives being defined by what their wife does and is.
Amidst all their strenuous royal engagements, the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh managed to raise 4 children. But this was no ordinary or conventional partnership.
It's worth remembering that at all times, the Queen wore the crown and Prince Philip wore the trousers. It was a traditional family. He led family life, and he was a very active, hands-on father.
I was the first child born to a reigning monarch for over 100 years. And I never, ever felt as if I was ignored or left on my own. The discipline that the Queen had for us, as Edward and I, for children when we were small, they never, ever forgot their parental responsibilities. And I remember being read to by my father on regular occasions. One always remembers those sorts of things.
But if the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh succeeded in raising a young family, as the children reached adulthood, agonising public crises lay ahead.
1992 is not a year on which I shall look back with undiluted pleasure.
The fire at Windsor Castle was the least of the tests for the royal family. Soon they seemed under attack on all sides. The excruciating scandals of their children's marriages and divorces. the tragic sudden death of Diana, and their failure, initially, to comprehend the public mood. And then, within a few short weeks of each other, the deaths of her little sister, Princess Margaret, and then her mother, Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother.
I think they've probably had rather more than their fair share of difficult storms that have arisen through no fault of their own in their lives. But to have to get through them in public, in the glare of publicity, it's inconceivably difficult.
Partly it's their fault for having let daylight in upon magic and got rid of the mystique of the royal family. And it's also the sense of deference that people used to have to the royal family in the 1950s and 60s has now completely disappeared.
The royal couple's wariness of exposing their private emotions means that public expressions of affection, as at their golden anniversary, are rare.
Of course, after 50 years of experience, I find there's a great temptation to give advice.
Nobody treats the Queen normally. Nobody at all, except for one person, the Duke of Edinburgh. And nobody in the world says to the Duke of Edinburgh, "Oh, Philip, do shut up," except for the Queen, and she does.
All too often, I fear Prince Philip has had to listen to me speaking. Frequently, we have discussed my intended speech beforehand, and as you will imagine, his views have been expressed in a forthright manner.
They have always had enormous love and affection and admiration for each other. I think, too, that they have managed to achieve what is so important in one's marriage, to be each other's best friend.
He is someone who doesn't take easily to compliments, but he has quite simply been my strength and stay all these years.
Love, respect and trust together have just made this the most amazingly successful 60-year-long marriage.
If you had to sum up the Queen and the Duke of Edinburgh's marriage in a sentence, how would you do that?
Wow. They'd probably never forgive me for answering this question wrong. I would say that it is a partnership between two people. Compromises have to be met on both sides to make that partnership and marriage work. Now that's a wonderful thing to say, and sadly I haven't been able to live up to that quite as much as my parents have.
We're heading back into the craziness that is the Australian jungle next, where the celebrities are really getting into it. I mean, have they got something to prove? I'm a Celebrity, Get Me Out of Here coming up. And over on ITV3, it's Taggart next.